Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're going to get started in a few minutes just to let everyone jump into the link. Thank you for joining. We're just going to give it another minute or two just to let people hop in, and then we'll get started. Maybe we do one more minute. Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Kylie Brown. I'm a Senior Account Director here at VizSense. I lead influencer marketing programs across alcohol industry, healthcare, beauty, and retail with a focus on helping brands drive measurable results and business impact while staying compliant. I am joined today by Erin Evanoka from Elevate Communications. Erin brings years of experience at the intersection of brand communications, PR strategy, and influencer marketing. Erin, welcome.
Thanks, Kylie. I'm excited to be here and excited to be joining you all today. A big part of our work at Elevate really sits at that intersection, as Kylie was saying, between earned media, influencer engagement, content, and brand strategy, and really overlaying kind of the art of shaping content that we have built over years of executing earned media campaigns with the evolution of the industry and working with creators and building content. So we work really deeply in highly regulated categories where that audience trust and brand reputation and messaging discipline all really, really matter. One of the biggest shifts we've seen over the last few years is that compliance can no longer operate as kind of the final legal review step before content goes live. The strongest programs are really building it directly into the strategy, into creator selection, messaging development, approvals, and execution from the beginning. So that's really the focus of today's conversation. In regulated industries, the challenge is building programs that can navigate compliance requirements while still connecting with audiences in a way that feels authentic, credible, and effective.
Awesome. I'm going to hop over to our agenda today. So, today, over the next 30 minutes, we'll cover the challenges of marketing in regulated industries, how marketing, legal, and agency teams can work together compliantly, some key platform considerations across healthcare, finance, alcohol, and kids products. And then Erin will share how Elevate managed a Medicare campaign with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts. And I'll walk through how VizSense executed a compliant Maker's Mark program at Costco. To our next slide here. So let's start with what our main challenge is. Influencer marketing in regulated industries is more complex, not just because of the rules, but because the rules are very layered, platform specific, and constantly changing. So, success requires coordination between marketing, legal, compliance, and agency partners, teams that did not always naturally work together. The brands we see struggling are doing so because they have not built the internal infrastructure, workflows, briefing processes, and approval gates needed to execute at the pace required by influencer marketing without cutting those corners.
And the cost of cutting those corners has gone up pretty significantly. The FTC revised its endorsement guidelines in both 2023 and 2024, and the core message is pretty unambiguous. Any material connection between a brand and a creator via payment, free product, equity, family ties, or even employment have to be disclosed. So brands, agencies, and platform partners are really all on the hook when disclosures are missing or inadequate. With the FTC and state attorneys general actively pursuing cases against major brands, it's no longer a hypothetical risk.
Yeah. And the FTC uses a consumer perspective test. So essentially, they're operating under the question of would an average viewer likely notice and understand the disclosure? If the answer is no, it does not count and then is therefore not compliant. A hashtag buried at the end of a caption or a verbal mention that gets cut in an edit, that does not cut it. The standards put the responsibility on brands and agencies to make clear, proper disclosures the norm and not the exception. So the strategic challenge is this: how do you move fast, maintain creative quality, authentic creators, posting high quality content, and execute rigorous compliance programs simultaneously?
And that's really the part of the conversation I wish that more senior marketers really prioritize because the relationship between marketing and legal is often really the difference between a program that scales efficiently and one that is constantly stalled in that approval process or cycling through edits back and forth. Um, a lot of teams tend to bring legal in at the end to review the finished product, look at the content, catch problems, and then approve or reject it. But that model tends to be slower and less efficient and therefore more expensive. So we found that the better approach is involving legal before creator outreach and contract negotiations even begin. And that upfront alignment really helps prevent expensive rewrites, delayed approvals, or last minute content pullbacks later.
Yeah, for sure. And operationally, it starts with a shared understanding of the risk profile for the specific campaign. Legal cannot do useful work in the abstract, as we know. They need to understand the creative intent, the scope, and the framework that enables it. So from there, the compliance brief acts as a bridge between the legal contract and the creative execution. So the contract with the creator really handles that liability, and then the brief really handles the execution. It tells creators exactly what they can and can't say, what we call our do's and don'ts, where they need to place, for example, hashtag ad, and what has already been approved when it comes to how they speak about the product or the name of the product, all those nitty-gritty details. When creators have clear, specific examples, compliance rates go down significantly. And the goal is not to police these creators, it's really to give them the tools to protect themselves and the brand at the same time. And that's where agencies like VizSense really come in to help be that middle ground, making sure that they're sticking to that brief, but also that they're still having that creative performance.
Absolutely. And I think that's a critical role that we like to play on the Elevate side as well, and just really working with teams and helping to define what that structure looks like. So for brands we're working with that are running influencer programs regularly, we found it really helpful to establish kind of a recurring sync amongst marketing, legal, and the agency team, even if it's a short standing touch point, before the campaign launch, midway, and then at the end of the process. That really helps resolve gray area and earlier in the process, and then keeps campaigns moving forward without too much back and forth later in the process. And so, if you bring the brief together, that meeting together, and really kind of working in collaboration, it strengthens the efficiency of a campaign all the way through.
Exactly. So here's what every brand needs to understand for a compliant influencer. program is built long before any of the content goes live. So it starts with thoughtful creator selection, not only just vetting the creators for brand fit and engagement and what audiences they're reaching, but also taking a deeper look into their profiles to ensure that they haven't posted content that could pose a risk, such as political extremism, aggressive behaviors, misusing products in the past, anything that conflicts with brand values or regulatory standards. From there, marketing and legal teams work hand in hand to build a clear checklist that guides the entire process. This includes setting expectations for disclosure, defining approval workflows, and outlining the requirements creators must meet before anything gets published online. Influencers are then brought into a structured but collaborative production process where content is reviewed, aligned, and refined to ensure it's both on brand and compliant. All of this upfront work ultimately protects both the brand and the creator, ensuring that when the content goes out, it performs well, complies with the rules, and accurately reflects the brand.
Definitely. And I think that's like the most important piece of the puzzle is this is a collaborative process. It is a collaboration. Ultimately, we want the content that a creator is putting forward to resonate with their audiences. And so we really need to work as a team to make sure that we're shaping that while protecting the brand. So having all those elements in place, make sure that, helps us make sure that we have the documentation so that if a creator publishes content that violates the agreed terms, we've got a clear paper trail showing that the brand has acted in good faith. Regulators and courts look really closely at whether a brand took reasonable steps to ensure compliance. So when you can demonstrate that you have the signed contract with the explicit requirements, a brief the creator received, a pre-approval process they bypassed, or documented correspondence that maps all of this out, it becomes much easier to demonstrate that the brand took reasonable proactive steps to enforce compliance, and it protects the creator. The FTC's focus is on systemic failure, not isolated mistakes. So it really comes down to whether a brand knew or should have known about noncompliance and failed to act. And brands that set clear expectations, document them, and enforce a review process are in a very different position than those that do not.
Exactly. And every agreement, as you mentioned in brief, should really have a takedown clause. And so if a creator publishes something that's non-compliant or brand damaging content, the contract should grant the brand the right to require immediate removal. And that's something that too your agency partners like VizSense and Elevate can help with as we're constantly monitoring the conversation that's being had on these pieces of content. And typically you need to have it removal clause within 24 to 48 hours. And that way you can terminate the relationship and withhold payment if the creator does not comply. It's a provision that rarely needs to be used, but when it does, it's really essential that it's in place. Each platform, as you know, has its own native disclosure tools, and the FTC expects brands to use them. So hashtags alone, even hashtag ad or hashtag sponsored, are not sufficient in every context. So on Instagram, for example, the paid partnership label appears directly below the creator's handle in both feed, posts, and stories. So this is the preferred disclosure method. And for stories, the label must be visible for the full duration of the story. For Reels, the label should accompany the video and any verbal or on-screen disclosure in the content itself as a best practice.
And similarly, TikTok has a branded content toggle in the posting settings. So when activated, that disclosure label automatically appears on the video. So brands should really contractually require contract or creators, excuse me, to use this feature, not just add a hashtag, since hashtags alone are really not sufficient on TikTok when monetary compensation is involved. YouTube actually also requires verbal disclosure in the video itself, ideally in the beginning of any video that's posted. They also have a paid promotion checkbox in the upload setting that triggers its own platform level label. And so brands should really strongly encourage creators to use both.
Now we're going to dive into working with influencers in regulated markets. So, in regulated industries, the goal is not to just constrain creators, it's to work with them in ways that protect both the brand and their authenticity. The process always begins with the influencer. So, that fit first. We look at how closely who they are, how they communicate, and how their audiences engage with their content. The priority is ensuring that it's a natural fit so the partnership feels credible and not forced. From there, compliance is built into the creative process earlier rather than later as an added to the end. Marketing and legal teams need to work together to translate regulatory requirements into practice guidelines that creators can actually use. So that includes clear disclosure instructions, approval messaging guardrails, and examples of what good content looks like on each platform. Instead of acting as gatekeepers, the brand's team's roles becomes one of navigation. So helping influencers stay within those lines while still producing content that performs well with their audience is key.
And I will add to that, Kylie, that I think one of the things we've found to be really helpful in regulated environments is having that onboarding call with influencer partners once contracts are signed, where we can really talk about how we can shape storylines that are going to be authentic to their audiences while also adhering to what those disclosures need to be and, really clearly mapping the messaging. So, there is that strong co-creation of content and collaboration all the way through.
For sure. Over communication with influencers is definitely
Key.
the most important part.
For sure. Okay, great. So we're going to just take kind of a little bit of a snapshot looking at, what changes by category as we look at regulation. One thing we always emphasize is that while influencer workflow may look similar across these categories, the level of regulatory scrutiny changes dramatically depending on the industry and the type of communication involved. And many of you probably know a lot of this, but we'll just quickly go through a couple of the categories. So for CPG, it's typically the most flexible category. The primary focus is on standard FTC disclosure compliance and then truthful product claims and making sure that creator messaging stays aligned with brand positioning without overstating product performance. Alcohol campaigns require much tighter controls around audience eligibility and responsible messaging. So, brands often require creators to demonstrate that the majority of their audience is over legal drinking age, and the content can really not glamorize excessive consumption or appeal to underage audiences. Depending on the activation, platform age gating tools may also come into play. In looking at healthcare, insurance, and pharma, those campaigns operate under a much higher level of regulatory and reputational scrutiny, particularly when communications involve claims, benefits, coverage, or health-related outcomes. So, depending on the category, brands may also navigate CMS, FDA, legal, compliance review requirements that are very much overlaid on top of the standard FTC regulations. So as a result, those programs focus less on direct promotion and more on education, guidance, disease awareness, or helping audiences navigate complex healthcare decisions responsibly. And then, if there is something that's very specific to, for example, pharma, there's a lot of overlay that needs to be put on to protect the brand. Financial influencer campaigns face another level of complexity because their messaging may also need to fall under SEC, FINRA, or CFPB oversight, depending on the product or the category. So that creates much tighter guardrails around investment advice, earnings claims, disclosures, and risk language. In many cases, the legal and compliance teams are involved before the creative development process and engagement even begins for these campaigns, just to make sure that, again, there's a lot of connectivity and looking at what those disclosures and brand protections need to be before a campaign launches. Okay, so we'll dig in quickly to building compliance into workflows. The practical challenge is that compliance can feel like it slows everything down, but influencer marketing moves so fast, and the idea of adding that legal review step can feel like a little bit of friction that creates some holding back of creative momentum. But really, what we found is that the friction's in the setup, not the execution. So, teams that invest in that upfront build and making sure that the compliant infrastructure is in place find that day-to-day execution actually gets faster, not slower, because everyone, the creators included, are operating from a clear shared framework. So there's no last-minute surprises, no content pulled back at the approval stage, and really no retroactive fixes that need to be put in place, which saves everybody time and makes sure the campaign lands more strongly.
For sure. And one thing too is we build compliance checkpoints directly into each campaign workflow. So disclosure requirements surface during the creator briefing, content approval queues flag posts that are missing disclosures before they go live. We also have post-campaign audits that verify that all the published content meets those agreed standards, as well as being able to flag any interesting or concerning conversations or comments that are left to the brand team, the legal team, the social team, whoever's in charge of that on your client's team. And the foundation has to be an organizational posture that really treats compliance as a baseline and not an afterthought. So every single piece of content, you're thinking through this and making sure that everything is going to be up to the standards when it gets to the brand. So hopefully you can minimize any back and forth edits with the creator. That posture really starts with leadership and filters down through every agency partner, every campaign manager, and every creator.
Awesome. Agreed. Now, to help bring this to life, we wanted to share just a couple real world examples that show how these programs actually operate in practice. As Kylie mentioned, I'll start with a Medicare focused campaign we developed for a regional health plan. Medicare really presents a very unique communications environment because there's so much confusion in the market, especially around open annual enrollment periods, where seniors and caregivers are trying to understand changes to plans, changes to coverage, deadlines, what to pick, etc. At the same time, the CMS regulations place significant restrictions around how plans, benefits, and enrollment related communication can be discussed and put forward. So we look at building campaigns for this really that are centered around providing guidance, clarity, and helping people navigate the journey and working with partners to really help tell those stories. So we pick trusted creators whose audiences naturally align with those caregiving and decision-making moments and those audiences, and then create content that's focused on helping them understand timelines, evaluation options, help support family decision making, and kind of reduce confusion around the process overall. So, from a compliance perspective, working really closely with legal from the beginning of the campaign, setting forth those messaging parameters, disclosures, and making sure that CMS regulations are really embedded into what we're even putting forward with our influencer brief out of the gates to secure proposals is critical. And then building in the workflow so that legal is looking at the list of partners, approving that, then looking at their proposals, approving kind of the content mix, and then the scripts before content is even produced really helped make sure that these campaigns were successful and effective without impacting the authenticity of the content that the creators were delivering to the marketplace. So for us, we found that the strongest performing partnerships really simplify this, complicated process and provided that relatable, approachable guidance that people could actually understand. One of the biggest lessons from this type of campaign is that in regulated categories, strongest influencer programs often help audiences navigate a challenge or a complex situation rather than push the hardest promotional message.
Exactly. And that leads us into an example as well on the alcohol side of the business for our 2025 Costco campaign we did with Maker's Mark. And the goal was really to drive in-store awareness and visibility through creator-led storytelling that felt authentic to the Costco shopping experience. So what made this campaign especially interesting was the layered compliance processes behind it. Beyond just standard FTC disclosure requirements, we also had to follow discus rules, and we also had to account for alcohol advertising regulations, platform-specific policies around responsible consumption and audience targeting. So for example, with creators posting about alcohol, we have to make sure that at least 75% of their audiences are over 21. We also carefully managed brand language and creator messaging to ensure that the content stayed aligned with the approved positioning while avoiding substantiated claims or wording that could unintentionally appeal to underaged audiences. So, on top of that, Costco's own vendor marketing guidelines added another layer of review that had to be incorporated to the creator briefing and approval process from the beginning. What makes this such a strong case study is that compliance did not make the content feel restrictive. It actually strengthened the storytelling by creating clear guardrails that allowed creators to focus on authentic shopping moments and lifestyle-driven content that resonated naturally with Costco consumers. So even though these steps took longer in the upfront, it made it all worth it in the end to have successful content get created and posted and not have any risks or compliance issues. Lastly, here before we move to the Q&A, here are our 5 takeaways from today. So compliance should really be treated as a strategic capability, not a legal burden. The strongest influencer programs in regulated categories build compliance directly into that creative process in the upfront instead of treating it as a final review step. Legal teams should be involved early during program architecture and planning, if not before, not just reviewing finished content. Every category carries a different risk profile from healthcare, alcohol, beauty, children's products. So compliance frameworks need to be tailored accordingly. That's where agency partners like VizSense and Elevate can really come in because we work across a variety of clients in a bunch of different industries and are able to use those learnings and share across clients. And finally, documentation matters. So contracts, briefs, approvals, and final assets should all be tracked. A strong paper trail protects the brand, creates clarity for the creators, and ultimately leads to smoother execution, stronger partnerships, and better ROI.
100%, Kylie. And I'll add one more. Remember that consumer trust is the long game here. So brands that disclose clearly and consistently and they can build more durable relationships than brands that skirt the edges. Compliance is really not about avoiding fines, it's about earning long-term audience trust. And so when your compliance program is built properly, it protects the brand, the creator relationships, and the audience.
Exactly. And thank you so much for your time today, Erin, and all of your perspective, especially just being such an expert in the industry. We're going to open it up for questions now. We have about 5 minutes. You're also welcome to reach out to either me or Erin directly. Here's our emails on the screen. We'll also send an email follow up with that information too. Let's see if there's any questions. Okay, so one of the questions here is how early should legal realistically be involved in influencer campaign planning?
You want me to take that one?
Go ahead.
Sure. So I think, really out of the gates, if possible, once a campaign is kind of set and the strategy is in place, it's really great to present that to legal, have them understand kind of the time frame and the expectations that the brand team and agency partners are looking for from legal, and then really establish what the review process should be. So if you're able to incorporate them into the campaign and make sure that, you're setting the touch points where they're going to review the list and they know when they're going to receive it. They're going to review the ultimate mix of partners and timeline. They're going to review the scripts from creators before content is produced, and then they're going to sign off on the final content. And you're mapping that out really clearly. It gives everyone a very smooth roadmap to track against. At the same time, before you are onboarding creators and having conversations with them about the campaign once they've been contracted, making sure that you have the guardrails from legal to incorporate into those onboarding sessions are really, really important. So at the end of the day, I think the earlier the better is the best approach, especially in industries that are more highly regulated.
For sure, agreed. Our next one is how do you balance authentic creator storytelling with strict messaging guardrails? I'll take this one.
Sure.
So the key really is to build a guardrails early instead of over editing later. So when you have conversations with your agency partner, for example, having those conversations in the upfront of how should they say the product? What can they and can't they say? What about application? Like, do they put it on their face? Is this something that they're drinking in a cocktail? All of those things need to be upfront in the conversations with your agency partners so that then when we can relay this information to the influencer and still give them the guardrails, but also give them that creative freedom. So we don't have to go back and do tons of edits and really then kind of dilute what that content could look like. So really the key is in that briefing stage, that super clear briefing, but also keeping it simple, not over communicating it or over complicating it to the creator, but just showing that they have safe boundaries, showing them some examples as well, and then letting them kind of have that creative freedom. One thing we do too is sometimes creators will send in a concept that we can run by a client and say, hey, this is an idea that a creator had. They want to go visit the distillery, and this is what that could look like. That way, we can say in the upfront to the client, this is what we're kind of thinking. Is this in compliance with what we could be doing for this program? So really, the communication and the briefing is key.
Yeah, and I think just building on that, that briefing often then translates into a toolkit that will provide to each of the influencer partners that's customized to them, that communicates some key messaging around some of those concepts that they've proposed and that we have agreed upon, so that they have all the appropriate language, all the appropriate disclosure information, some recommended content, and then also a resource library that they can pull from for, if they need background information, if they are linking out to a specific site, if there is creative that, they may want to incorporate, putting that all in the toolkit is so helpful.
For sure, for sure. Another question, how do you get industries like insurance and financial to trust the process when they are so used to having control?
That is a great question. And I think it's really about twofold. One, education and making sure that, out of the gates, they understand that ultimately this is co-created content. We're not handing the reins to a creator and saying, go off and do what you can. There are, if the campaign is set up the right way, those checkpoints that are really managed and controlled all the way through. We are working hand in hand with the creators on the content that they're developing. So that concept might be workshopped, and discussed and then reviewed by legal and then edited. And then, the influencer takes that approved concept and then works to put together a script. We then sit down with the influencer and edit that script. That script goes to legal. There are also guardrails that we may need to put in place, for example, for a financial services client, in order to execute a campaign about, for example, a debit card and usage and a give back that was tied to philanthropic charity. Those creators have to be members of the financial institution. And so working to make sure that those guardrails are in place at the start of a campaign is critical. And working to set those expectations out of the gates with the influencers prior to getting their proposals is really, really important. And then conversely, working with the brand to make sure that we have all the legal boundaries that need to be put forward in a campaign at the strategic build phase just makes execution, so much cleaner, easier, and more efficient across the board. And it makes sure that the content resonates in the right way, which is ultimately the end goal of everything we're doing.
For sure. I think we can do maybe one more. What are the most common disclosure mistakes you see brands and creators making today? I would say that the biggest issue is really if they, like, for example, bury hashtag ad in the caption, or they don't have it on screen the full time, relying on like vague language like partner, or they forget to use the platform disclosure tools. Those can always present as an issue. And that's something too that as an agency partner, we always want to catch. And the other thing could be too, like going off script, or potentially they're misusing the product. Like, for example, a face wash client of ours, they have a product that needs to be used on completely clean skin. There can't be anything prior to that. So we need to make sure that we are catching all of those little nitty-gritty things before the content goes live, so that that way when the influencer posts, the consumer has a very clear picture of what the product is, how they use it, how not to use it. And those are all things that I feel like, especially in like beauty and healthcare, really are important, and making sure everything's compliant.
Agreed. And I think, at the end of the day, the disclosures also protect the creators because while it's critically important on the brand side, from a regulation perspective, it's also important to the creators that their audiences know that, when they have a paid piece of content, that it is a partnership and that they're reflecting that accurately so that the content can really resonate in the way that it's meant to. And so I think making sure that, the creators that you're working with understand that, and don't want to bury it because they want to be authentic and honest with their audience is always, a helpful position from which to start. So I think that's critical. And then, to your point, Kylie, making sure that there's a final review process before content goes live really helps to ensure that, you're reviewing not only, say it's a reel, you're reviewing not only the reel and the story set that goes with it and making sure that disclosures are appropriately labeled on all of those based on, the asset on the platform, but also the caption and what's going with that and how things are communicated and then what it looks like on screen when they're toggling the right partnership, depending on which platform it is. So all of that I think is so critical to just making sure you're setting things up the right way and avoiding some of those common disclosure issues.
For sure. Thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you, Erin, for your time. It was so great to chat with you today about risks and regulations.
Thank you. Appreciate you guys having me. It was a great conversation, and thank you all for joining. We really appreciate it. Sorry we went a couple minutes over, but hope you'll join the VizSense team again, and hope Elevate can be part of the conversation.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Erin. Have a great
Thanks,
rest of your day,
everybody.
everyone.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.